The air was thick with tension in the tournament grounds of King's Landing. On that fateful day, the greatest knights of the Seven Kingdoms gathered for an epic contest. The sounds of cheers and applause reverberated through the stands as knights clashed in displays of strength and skill. But little did they know, the events of the day would spiral into chaos, a tragedy that would change the course of Westeros forever. Among the contenders was Sir Loras Tyrell, known as the Knight of Flowers, a man renowned for his beauty, grace, and skill with a lance. He had captured the hearts of many, and his fame spread far beyond the reach. However, today, he would face a brutal opponent, Sir Gregor Clegane, known as the Mountain. The man was a beast of a knight, towering over his opponents and known for his unparalleled strength. The day's joust had set the stage for a deadly confrontation between the two. Loras, full of confidence and youthful energy, stood ready. His armor gleamed in the sun as he adjusted his grip on his lance. Across the field, Gregor Clegane towered in his dark plate armor, his expression a cold mask of fury. The Mountain's eyes locked onto Loras, and for a moment, everything seemed still. The knights charged toward each other, and the ground beneath them seemed to shake with each thunderous step. As they closed in, Loras' lance broke against Gregor's massive shield, while the Mountain's lance struck true, knocking Loras off his horse and sending him crashing to the ground. The crowd gasped, their voices mixing with the sound of the crash. Loras struggled to rise, dazed and vulnerable, as Gregor dismounted from his horse with terrifying speed. "I won't be so merciful this time," Gregor growled, raising his massive sword high. The Mountain's eyes were filled with hatred, and before anyone could react, he swung his sword down upon Loras with all his might. The hound, Sandor Clegane, Gregor's own brother, rushed forward, but he was too late. The massive sword of the Mountain descended, crashing into Loras' armor. The young Tyrell let out a blood-curdling scream as the sword cleaved through the thick plate, causing a deep gash to appear across his chest. His body flailed in agony as the crowd erupted into chaos. Some screamed, others rushed to protect themselves, while some brave souls rushed towards the Mountain to intervene. "Leave me!" the hound bellowed as he charged toward his brother. With a roar, he reached Gregor, swinging his own long sword at him with remarkable fury. But the Mountain was momentarily stunned by the unexpected resistance. For a split second, it seemed like the hound might have the upper hand. The two brothers locked weapons, their swords grinding against one another with tremendous force. The ground beneath their feet trembled with each swing. But despite the hound's strength, it was clear that Gregor was the stronger of the two. With a brutal twist, Gregor shoved the hound back and swung his sword once more, this time aiming for the hound's head. The hound parried with all his might, but the blow knocked him off balance. His blade scraped along Gregor's, and he staggered backward. The crowd held its breath as the two massive warriors faced each other once again, locked in an intense duel. "Stay back." Robert Baratheon's voice boomed from the stands as he called for the guards to step in, but it was too late. The Mountain's rage had reached its peak. As the hound struggled to regain his footing, Gregor launched a ferocious attack, pushing the hound back with a flurry of brutal blows. With a twisted grin, Gregor raised his sword for one final strike. But before he could swing, a figure appeared at his back, a shadow among shadows. Renly Baratheon, who had been watching from the sidelines, moved quickly, taking advantage of Gregor's moment of distraction. Unarmored, with only a dagger in hand, Renly launched himself at the Mountain. His weapon struck Gregor's neck again and again, sinking deep into the flesh. Gregor roared in pain, but the Baratheon brothers continued their assault. Guards rushed in, weapons drawn, trying to subdue the Mountain before he could retaliate. Despite the best efforts of the guards, Gregor fought back fiercely. With a swipe of his sword, he knocked the first man down. Another tried to stab him with a spear, but Gregor deflected it with one swift motion. For a moment, it seemed as though no one could stand against him. However, just as Gregor thought he might win, the tide turned. The guards finally managed to force Gregor to the ground, pushing him onto his knees. Blood poured from his neck, but Gregor's anger still burned in his eyes. He looked up, glaring at those who surrounded him, but it was too late. The hound, having recovered from his earlier injury, approached Gregor, sword in hand. "Get back!" the hound growled to the surrounding guards. He's mine." With that, he raised his blade and, in one swift motion, drove it deep into Gregor's throat. The mountain's head rolled from his shoulders, crashing to the dirt with a sickening thud. The crowd fell silent. The once mighty mountain was no more. It was a moment of both triumph and tragedy, and no one knew what to say or how to react. The hound stood over his brother's lifeless body, his sword still dripping with blood. In the stands, chaos erupted as people realized what had just transpired. But the bloodshed was far from over. As the tournament was declared a forfeit, Loras Tyrell's life hung in the balance. His wounds were grave, and as Mesters rushed to attend to him, it was clear that his chances of survival were slim. Despite their best efforts, Loras succumbed to his injuries, leaving the realm in mourning. King Robert personally offered condolences to the Tyrell family, and the streets of King's Landing became a somber procession as the funeral for the Knight of Flowers was held. But the events of the tournament did not end there. Ned Stark, observing the court's reactions and the growing tensions, felt a dark storm brewing in the realm. The Tyrells, bitter and angry over Lora's death, began to voice their displeasure. The Reachmen called for justice. Tywin Lannister, ever calculating, watched from the shadows, silently pleased with the chaos unfolding in King's Landing. The tournament that had once been a symbol of chivalry and noble competition had devolved into chaos, and with the death of Sir Loras Tyrell, the ripple effects were felt throughout Westeros. His body, still warm from the tragic encounter with the mountain, was now being prepared for a funeral. The streets of King's Landing were filled with mourners, but the loss cut deeper than just the death of a man. It was a blow to House Tyrell's pride and position, and the aftershocks would echo in the halls of power for years to come. As the Tyrells mourned their beloved knight, anger and resentment began to take root. Mace Tyrell, Lord of the Reach, wasted no time in making his grief known. He called for justice, not only for his son, but for the injustice that had occurred at the tournament. The mountain's actions, while seemingly dismissed by many in the court, had left an indelible scar on the Tyrells' reputation. Tywin Lannister, however, knew that this was more than just a matter of family vengeance. It was a political challenge. Ned Stark, having witnessed the deadly confrontation and the aftermath, observed the mounting tension with growing concern. The death of Loras Tyrell and the gruesome actions of the Mountain had turned the tide of public opinion. Even those loyal to the Lannisters found it increasingly difficult to defend the violent knight's actions. Yet, Tywin Lannister was not a man to be easily swept aside by public opinion. He quickly moved to distance his family from Gregor's actions, but his efforts were met with little success. The Tyrells, particularly Mace Tyrell, were determined to see retribution. King Robert Baratheon, despite his outwardly jolly demeanor, felt the pressure mounting from every corner. The death of Sir Loras had not only ignited a fire within the Tyrells, but it had also caused a rift in his court. Noble families from across Westeros took sides, with some speaking out against the Mountain's actions and others voicing their discontent with the Lannisters' role in it. The delicate balance of power that had kept the realm at bay was now threatened by the chaos that had unfolded in the tournament grounds. In the aftermath of the violence, Robert offered his condolences to the Tyrells. A hollow gesture meant to calm the situation, but it was clear that no words could undo the damage. In private, Mace Tyrell's anger boiled over, and he sent word to his allies in the Reach, calling them to arms. The Tyrells would no longer sit idly by as the Lannisters expanded their influence unchecked. They would demand justice, and they would do so with strength. Meanwhile, Ned Stark found himself once again caught in the web of political maneuvering. Having long suspected the Lannisters' involvement in the death of Jon Arryn, the former Hand of the King, he now saw a new opportunity to investigate further. The death of Loras Tyrell could serve as the catalyst he needed to uncover the truth about the Lannisters' secrets and their connections to the death of Jon Arryn. Ned's mind turned to alliances, and he considered the possibility of forging one with House Tyrell. The Reach was one of the most powerful regions in Westeros, and its support would be invaluable in his pursuit of justice. Sir Garland Tyrell, Loras's brother, approached Ned in private, his face a mask of grief and determination. "Lord Stark," he said quietly, "my father asks for your support in the wake of my brother's death, but it is not just justice we seek. We seek the truth. Garland's voice was steady, but the anguish in his eyes was unmistakable. The mountain is dead, but there are those who allowed his actions to go unpunished. The Lannisters may try to distance themselves from this, but we know who was behind it. Ned listened carefully, weighing Garland's words. The Tyrells, though known for their political savvy, had a long history of aligning with the powerful houses of Westeros. But now, with the Lannisters vulnerable and the Tyrells seeking retribution, an alliance could shift the balance of power. The Starks and the Tyrells together could challenge the Lannisters' grip on the throne. "I understand your pain, Sir Garland," Ned said, his voice low, "but I am not interested in vengeance. I seek justice, and justice must be done carefully. If we are to move against the Lannisters, it must be with clear evidence, not out of bloodlust. I am willing to stand with you, but it cannot be for the sake of revenge alone." Garland nodded, his expression hardening with resolve. "I agree, Lord Stark, this is not about vengeance. It is about ensuring that those who commit such atrocities are held accountable." The discussion turned to strategy. Garland and his father, Mace Tyrell, began to elaborate on their suspicions regarding the Lannisters' role in Jon Arryn's death. They spoke of Littlefinger's involvement and the mysteries surrounding the death of the former Hand. Ned's mind raced as he processed the information. He knew that the Lannisters were behind Jon Arryn's death, but Garland's words confirmed what he had long suspected. As the conversation continued, the Stark and Tyrell families began to form the beginnings of an alliance, one built on mutual interests and shared goals. But even as they plotted their next moves, the Lannisters were already one step ahead. Tywin Lannister, ever the strategist, had sensed the brewing storm and moved swiftly to consolidate his power. The Lannisters' allies in court, though shaken, remained loyal, and Tywin's influence over the king was not easily shaken. But in the shadows of the court, alliances were shifting. The Tyrells, once content to play a secondary role in the politics of Westeros, were now poised to rise to power. And with House Tyrell's wealth, influence, and military might, the Lannisters knew they would have to tread carefully. The game had changed, and no one was sure how it would end.